Out of the shower, so sorry for my hair. But good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It's all just nonsense. Yeah. Is it all just nonsense, right? So we're going to talk about actually a problem that I see growing, a growing problem that I see. It's not a new problem, but it is, I think, a growing problem in I will call it philosophy, but it's in thought in general, in modern day thinkers. How modern day thinkers, and it's not just modern day thinkers, but we see this more and more in modern day thinkers, where there's this issue of not knowing when the claims you're making are appropriate for the field of study that you are investigating. So, for instance, let me just make this clear. There's a difference between philosophy and science, and for a really good reason. And it's not to discredit philosophy, and it's not to say anything about science. Although I will say this, I think it's actually pretty clear. Although maybe people who are scientists actually study the field and they have never studied philosophy, they won't accept this claim, they won't accept this idea. But philosophy is the bedrock for science. Science is actually a philosophy. It is a theory of knowledge, and and that's a good thing. It's a very powerful theory of knowledge, science. Very powerful, very important, very influential, very useful, very practical. Everything we see in our modern world is the product of science, right? Not everything we see, but inventions, innovations, right? What we call progress. This is all the result of science. So science has proven itself a really, really helpful, useful domain for the acquisition of knowledge. But there are areas where philosophers or thinkers, and I'll drop some names here. For instance, you know, why am I missing? Why am I messing up his name here? Uh, Laws of Human Nature, 21 Laws of Power. All right, for some reason I don't know why I'm blanking out on his name. I know his name, right? Okay. Anyway, so it'll come back to me. Probably you guys know in the chat. Just blanking on his name for whatever reason. Very popular guy. Robert Greene. Robert Greene. Okay. So Robert Greene, for instance, calls himself a philosopher, which is great. But for instance, he makes a lot of scientific claims. I'll circle back to him in a moment. Let's go to, for instance, you might have heard, if you're in this whole philosophy YouTube space, you might have heard of Rene Girard. Okay, so what are some claims that, for instance, Robert Greene makes, and for instance, that Robert Girard makes? And I'll show you why they're so problematic, and why there's this problem in modern philosophy of philosophers making scientific claims and then using some sort of subjective, weird argument to show, without actually showing anything, to show apparently that it's true, right? That's the problem that is so rampant now. So let me give you an example. So Robert Greene, for instance, he states that power is kind of a central motivator, all right, of human beings. Power. Now, okay, this is a problem. It's not necessarily a problematic claim. It's a claim that can be investigated, right? But you have to ask yourself, is it a claim that you can just sit back in an armchair and investigate? Right? Can you just sit in an armchair and investigate it and think about it and think, oh yeah, for sure, right? Power. Oh, okay. I'm going to just think about it and come up with examples and then kind of poetically dance around it and then conclude that power is a central motivator of people, right? But unfortunately, and nothing against him, like, I know I sound like I'm really criticizing him. He's really, a lot of what he says is really great, and helpful and has helped people. So don't take what I'm saying the wrong way, except that as an example here, he's he's actually crossing the line from philosophy and crossing into science because he's actually making a scientific claim. He's making a scientific claim. And what do I mean by that? Well, power. Let's talk about the word power, the concept of power. In science, in more specifically in what's called structural equation modeling, which is a area of high-level statistics, power, this idea of power, is called a latent variable. What is a latent variable? A latent variable is something that cannot be directly measured. How do you directly measure power? So, for instance, I can talk about the speed of something, right? In physics, meters per second. Okay, that's the unit of measurement. I can directly measure that. So it's not a latent variable, right? So that's how we define that. It's a non-latent variable. If I can directly measure it, meters per second, I know the units. But power, what are the units on that? No units, right? It's a latent variable. So what we have to do is we have to deconstruct it, and we have to understand in some model how does it affect behavior, right? And it's what's called an empirical question. It's not something we can just think of in our mind. We have to do experiments. We have to collect data, and we have to answer this question, right? And so what Green does is kind of just sidesteps it. And yeah, okay, you might say, well, he uses historical examples. Well, sure, I can use historical examples of anything. I could come up with any claim, and I can use historical examples of anything, right? I can find, trust me, history's long and contains a lot of events. I can find any examples from history to prove whatever point that I want to try to prove, right? That is called cherry picking data, right? And so Green does a lot of that. And again, I'm really picking on Green here, but let's move over to, for instance, René Girard. René Girard was a philosopher of what's called mimetic theory. Okay, I'm going to explain this and break it down. So mimetic desire is a form of desire, and Gerard claimed, and Gerard is becoming a little bit more popular, I think, on YouTube right now. That's why I wanted to talk about René Girard. Gerard claimed that all desire is essentially mimetic, meaning we don't know what to desire. When we come up in the world, we live in the world, we don't know what to desire. And so what we do is we kind of look around at what other people desire, right? So for instance, people like Mercedes. I guess I should have Mercedes, right? People go to college. I guess that's what I should want to do too. People have, buy houses, and I guess that's what I should do too. So, you kind of develop your desires based on looking around you at what people value, what people desire. And you'd say, well, man, that seems pretty intuitive to me. Of course, now that you mention it, Gerard, that makes a lot of sense, right? It seems like common sense, right? Maybe you think that way. It seems like common sense, of course. And the problem with that is that it's still biased thinking. If we're really being objective, right? If we're being very strict. We're being very strict and objective. We want to say, okay, it seems like it's common sense to me, right? That claim seems like it's common sense to me. And once you feel that way, this seems like it's common sense to me. If you're really doing an analysis and you want to be objective, how you should respond to that thought is, okay, so what? So what that it sounds like it's common sense to me, right? So what? I'm going to ignore that. At least for the purposes, sometimes it's good to follow your intuition for decision making and so forth. It's not kind of the situation that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the situation in which you are really trying to find the truth of something, and you're not in a kind of a decision fork moment where you have to make some split-second decision and you have to use some heuristics. It's not that. Herman, welcome. Yes, nice to have you here. Austria, I remembered. So, but that's not what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about here if you want to find the truth. And so what he posits here, what Gerard posits, Rene Girard posits, is this theory of mimetic desire. Hey, Doofus, welcome. love your name. Um, so that's what he posits. Now, we know it's common sense, but he claims he's a philosopher, right? I'm doing philosophy. But see, now here's the problem. Is he's a philosopher that is now making an empirical claim. And what Gerard does, and yeah, Herman, I'll get to you in a moment. If you're a philosopher who is making an empirical claim, there's no problem with that. I'm not saying philosophers can't talk about science in their philosophy or talk about empirical things in their philosophy. No problem. But what Gerard mostly does, yeah, he cites some research and some social theory concepts here and there, yes, for sure. But it's not a rigorous analysis of the data. Of, okay, I have this theory, mimetic theory. Now let me prove it using data. He doesn't pretty much none of that, right? He actually does. He conducts no experiments of his own to figure that out. Now, I'm going to contrast that, and I will, Herman, I will get to you in a moment. I'm going to contrast that a little bit with, for instance, Albert Bandura. Right now, Albert Bandura, who is kind of the founder, he's known as kind of the founder of what's called social cognitive theory. In the 1960s, there was the development of what's called the cognitive revolution, where people were starting to reject, researchers, I mean, by people, researchers were starting to reject the old paradigms of psychology, what's called operant conditioning, where we just predict behavior based on environmental influences. It ends up even in mouse models, by the way, in mouse models not even being adequate, right? And that was it wasn't even shown to be inadequate in humans. That theory, even in mice, in rodents, it was first found that we couldn't adequately predict their behavior using the old models. So he was really revolutionary, and then he took it into humans. He took this theory into humans and started to make observations. And Bandura, contrasting him to Gerard now, Albert Bandura, he actually conducted the experiments. He was not a philosopher, he was a psychologist. But he actually conducted the experiments. And what did he do? He actually started to find a lot of the same stuff that Gerard was talking about, although it ended up, as science ends up doing, being more nuanced, right? So whereas Gerard made this sweeping claim that all desire is mimetic, or all desire is based on what our observations of other people, Bandura found that we do have what's called social learning. We do engage in what's called social learning, where we observe others' behavior and then we mimic, right, their behavior and oftentimes their desires. But it's not, and here's my dog again, but it's not universal. It's not always generalizable. There's variability in our desires. Not all of our desires are mimetic. Right, so you see how that Gerard not doing experiments, and hey, One Punch Man, hey, welcome. So Gerard not doing experiments and just making conclusions philosophically without actually doing the experiments, you see how that could be really, really, not dangerous is the wrong word, it could be dangerous, but it's like damaging to our actual knowledge, right? And so, Herman, I'm going to take a look at your comments here. So isn't the whole thing with philosophy, also ancient philosophy, to think about the world and to raise some concepts how it seems to work? Life then proves if the claims hold. Do you see this different? And Karaphilic, hey, from Pakistan, hey, from the States here. So, and welcome. So yeah, actually, no, Herman, here, this is great. So the role I see for philosophy is kind of like this. So, one, if you make a scientific claim, I think now more than ever, philosophy does need, in order to make a lot of its assertions and make a lot of its arguments, philosophy does need to use science and scientific data, right, or reference it, right, in some way in order to make the arguments, right? Because, for instance, if you like Jürgen Habermas does a great job of this. I always talk about Jürgen Habermas. Jürgen Habermas does a great job of this. In his theory of communicative action, he's referencing Lawrence Kohlberg, who is a famous psychologist as well, the stages of moral development. And so he's actually, Bandura is making assertions, but he's making his assertions based on, or he's using actual fairly well accepted theory to as part of his argument, right? And so that's a good use. That's a good use of science and philosophy. Now, where do people go wrong in and what are some other uses of philosophy? Pure logic. You know what philosophers would also say is pure logic. Ontology. All right, philosophy does have a huge role even outside science. Okay, ontology, for instance, and epistemology. So, for instance, asking, how do we know what we know? And it's a legitimate question even outside the scientific realm, right? So you're not always making a scientific claim. Case in point. So here's a non-scientific claim in philosophy. So what I'm just trying to think of like a non-scientific claim in philosophy. So an assertion would be, what should we study in science? Right. Thank you, J Puck. Same to you. And welcome. So what should we study? Right? What activities should we engage in? So like moral questions. I don't think, and you guys know I'm a very like scientific person, right? If you've been to my channel, I'm really, really like I love science. I don't think morality is a scientific question. It can be, again, it can be informed by moral, and it certainly is informed by scientific realities as well. But it itself, I don't think as actually, as an example, a scientific thing. I think it's more of an a priori thing, where it comes from more of a logical understanding of things. So what are values? Are they some scientific thing? It's hard to cover all knowledge with science. And so Herman, science does a great job with prediction. Science does a great job with certain ontology, like studying certain areas of existence, what exists and what does not exist, and so forth. It's great at making models, but I would actually argue, as many philosophers of science have argued, that it does not capture, as of yet, and maybe we don't know, it doesn't seem to capture all of reality. Mathematics would be an example. So mathematics is a foundation of not religion. No, I mean, I'm not religious. All right, personally, I'm secular, but I'm talking more about, and I'm not against anybody, quite honestly, with religion. I mean, I'm not a secular person who says all religious people are bad. I think there are, like, just understand that. So I'm not hostile. I do see. Anyway, it's actually a different conversation completely. It's a different conversation completely. Um, but yeah, it's just a different conversation. It's a different conversation. Let's stay on that because that's a deep rabbit hole right there. But anyway, so science, yes, smart ape. Oh, I love your name. I'm a smart ape too. Although I don't know how smart I am, but I'm smarter than an ape, hopefully. So um, so Anas for us. Oh, okay. Actually, good segue. Good segue. What do you think about absurdity? And Anas for us, uh, are you basically are you referring to like Camus, basically like Camus' philosophy mostly, kind of existentialist philosophy and things like that? I'll let you respond, but let me see. Okay, So a non-serious question there, but but what do you think about absurdity? Now, here's my answer. Here's my complicated answer about absurdity. So, it's complicated. It's complicated. Hey, Mark Dune, welcome, welcome. Hey, Iman, welcome, welcome. Absurdity, if you mean from the standpoint of like Camus. All right, so it's complicated. Here's actually a good example of where science might not apply in terms of knowledge and ontology, epistemology and ontology. Although in the future we don't know. I leave it as an open question because in the future we we might have more scientific discoveries and they might bridge the gap between what I'm going to talk about. But what is called phenomenology, there is an area of philosophy that I find that I'm undecided about, quite honestly, but I find really, really fascinating, which is phenomenology. And phenomenology is, let me explain it and try to explain it. Phenomenology on us, and you're kind of hitting on this with absurdity. Phenomenology has to do with, not with logic, right? There's an area of philosophy that has to do with logic and math, right? And understanding those realities. And then there is an area of philosophy that has to do with empiricism or facts, understanding data, understanding inductive reasoning and scientific reasoning, and that's another area of philosophy for epistemology and ontology. But there really is legitimately another area called phenomenology that studies what you might say is raw, unfiltered experience as it is. So you say, well, how's that different from psychology, right? And I'm getting to absurdity here. I'm getting to what you're talking about in terms of absurdity. How does that deal with, how's it different from psychology? Well, again, psychology is more of a science in the sense that it's creating models of the thing, right? When we talk about, for instance, depression is a latent variable, right? We say we construct it as a latent variable. But when you say, well, what's your experience of depression? It's not the same as the model, right? And you might have heard before this idea that the model does not equal reality, right? And that's very true. So then what is the reality? Right? That's a very interesting question. What's the reality? If what science can do is model things, and it's not the reality, and it's simply modeling the reality, then it's a very interesting question, right? Because where's the reality? What is the reality? And that is more of a philosophical question. And I think maybe phenomenology can help us there a little bit. And when you talk about absurdity on us, um, absurdity, I do think it's more of a subjective thing. I think it's more of an attitude. I think it's more of an attitude, and coming at this with like Sartre's view, Jean-Paul Sartre's view. Uh, I think what he would say is it's a choice. You know, it's a choice whether you choose absurdity, right? You can choose that attitude of absurdity or not. Daniel Bates, welcome, welcome. I'm curious, what do you have your PhD in? He says PhD, so I'm curious about that. And Smart Ape, it don't get your problem thesis. It don't. I don't get your problem thesis. Is that what you're saying? I don't get your problem thesis. Can you elaborate? I'd love to, because I'd love to maybe be more specific if I'm not being clear. Um, yeah, right. So the model, perfect. The model partially represents reality aggregated across groups, and models that with respect to like latent variables, right? They're dimensionally reduced. So for instance, when we look at cognitive science, you cannot simultaneously model, right? You can technically, theoretically, simultaneously model all the neurons firing all at once with some whatever time series or something. That it would be crazy to calculate it. And so what we do is we dimensionally reduce it. So the model, and even if you modeled all those neurons and everything, it's still a model, right? So it's like, what is the thing that we're investigating? The model is very useful for prediction, but then getting under to the reality of the thing in itself, that's where philosophy can be very interesting. And we get into kind of phenomenology as a very helpful tool for understanding, well, what is this raw, unfiltered experience that we have, right? There are a lot of comments here, so let me read some of these. Abhinav, you say to be present as it is. We are never in the present. We live through patterns of thoughts in our mind. I believe thesis can't do justice to experience. Philosophy is just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, so it depends on what you see, Abhinav, as the role of philosophy, I think, as well, right? And then Mark Dune, it's your choice if you want to choose absurdity or inevitability. Yeah, so that's what Sartre would say, right? And it's a choice, right? It's an attitude. I would say absurdity is not necessarily an objective reality, and I think Camus would maybe be okay with that too. It's not an objective reality. Uh, I actually, I do actually believe for various grounds, and I've actually written a lot on this, that morality is objective. It's just most of the time we can't grasp the truth of it without interacting with others and finding that out. So I don't believe in absurdity as an objective thing, but it can be a subjective attitude and potentially a valid one. So complex thing. The reality that you mentioned really helps. So you mean concept of absurdity varies? Yeah, I think so on us. Yeah, absolutely. Herman, you say the ancient Greek philosophy was very interconnected with religion. Yeah, it was interconnected with religion to an extent. Um, but what makes a good life? Well, we all know. Well, if you don't know, Plato, right? Plato's idea of the good, which is from Socrates' idea of the good, ultimate good, right? Was in a very real sense kind of a religious concept. Aristotle talked about the unmoved mover, which is the prima mobile, right? He believed in a god, right? PhD is in mental health counseling. Yeah, psychology is deeply philosophical. Absolutely. Oh, Daniel, yes. So, Daniel, my background is in neurobiology and philosophy, kind of a mix. Field called value theory. So, a field called value theory, which basically just studies what people value, how value motivates their behavior, and what is value from a philosophical standpoint. And so yeah, it's kind of an interdisciplinary field where in terms of value theory, you kind of have to know a little bit of everything, like a little bit of psychology, a little bit of neuroscience, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it becomes overwhelming. So, um, yeah. So, what do you think is a problem with modern philosophy? So, Smart Ape, I would actually just go back after this is done because I went into it a lot. But look at my discussion of, for instance, Robert Greene and, for instance, Rene Girard. Making empirical claims. So basically, I'll just boil it down again real quick. Philosophers making empirical claims and trying to prove those empirical claims from the armchair instead of doing experiments. That's the problem that I have with a lot of modern philosophers. And again, let me reiterate what I said at the beginning of this live, is that it's not a problem to make empirical claims in philosophy, to make your argument. No problem at all. The problem is not to actually make the claim and then cite some experiment or series of experiments that have been done, right? But just to make the claim and say, well, look, as an example, I can find 5 cases in the Renaissance when this person, this is what Robert Greene does, snuck around and tried to scheme against this other person, and so those 5 examples prove my point about why power motivates people, to whatever. Power is a universal motivator. So, okay, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for the sub, and I appreciate you. So, see you again. See you around. Yeah. So, yes, definitely. I think cross discipline focus is probably more important than ever because let's be honest. Reality is an entire picture, right? Understanding truth is an entire picture, right? It's important to understand, for scientists, it's important to understand things like literature. And the best scientists have, in fact, and do study things like literature and poetry and art and things like this. And I think the reverse is true, and this is really true. None of the artists, also the artists and the poets and philosophers, go on and they study science, right? They should all study each other, because the more holistic a picture you have of what's going on. And here's my dog again. Of course, she always interrupts me during a live stream. All right. So the more holistic picture you have, guys, I swear, if you actually look back at all my other live streams, she's always hopping in the live. But anyway, so you get the point. So, guys, feel free to subscribe. Feel free to check out my Critical Thinking Academy in the about section, and in any link. So feel free to check that out if you want to work together on critical thinking skills and also persuasion skills. Feel free to check that out. And of course, I'm here, and you could reach out to me if you ever have any questions, or you just want to nerd out on something and you want to have a cool, fun discussion about something. Feel free to just reach out to me by email. I'm usually it's fun to have a conversation. So feel free. Let me just read these last comments. So. Anas, I think we really don't have definite truth, and even if it exists, it's not in this dimension. Yeah, Anas, so you make a point. I actually take the position that there is truth. However, I don't think humans are really equipped, especially just in your own mind without interacting with anybody, to to grasp that truth, right? Smart ape, laziness. Yeah, anything armchair is a problem. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. I'm glad you're with me on that, right? Because it's so important to validate our claims that we make with data and do the right analyses and make the right assumptions, and then submit those analyses to other people to analyze and also to potentially discredit. And that's the best way to do things, right? So, who are the day you have this live? Okay, the days that I have this live: Wednesdays at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, U.S. time. So you can catch me there. But of course, as I said, guys, if you want to, so 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. time. But as I said, if you want to have a conversation with me, as I said, you can reach out to my Discord, in my Discord group, Discord chat. It's all in any description, in any video. Also, you can check out my Critical Thinking Academy there in any description in my video. And also just reach out to me by email if you want to just have a chat. So, all right, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you next week or anytime you want to chat with me. Take care.